For 2 years, Marco Pierce has started every morning by looking at the last photo his daughters ever sent him, a selfie from the Northgate Mall shoe department, excitedly showing off a new pair of running shoes. The police told him they were likely runaways, a theory Marco never believed. Now, a late-night call from a cold case detective changes everything. A dying janitor has confessed to finding something in a service corridor the night the girls disappeared, a single colorful shoe he was paid to keep quiet about. What he revealed would prove a father's intuition is a powerful thing, and that the truth, no matter how deeply it's buried, has a way of coming to light. Stay with us as we uncover what really happened to the Pierce sisters. The house was quiet. It had been for 734 days. Marco Pierce knew the exact number because he marked each one on a calendar in the kitchen, a grim ritual that started the day after his daughters, 17-year-old Adelaide and 15-year-old Corinne, vanished. The silence was the worst part. It was a heavy physical thing that filled the empty rooms and pressed down on him, a constant reminder of the laughter that used to echo off the walls. His ex-wife, Lena, had told him he needed to move on, to sell the house and its painful memories. She had packed up the girls' things 6 months after they disappeared, placing them in neatly labeled boxes in the garage. "It's for the best, Marco," she had said, her voice strained with a grief that had sharpened into a desperate need for closure. But Marco couldn't do it. To pack away their lives felt like giving up, and he had promised himself and them that he never would. His life had shrunk to a simple, painful loop. He'd wake up, look at the photo on his phone, Adelaide holding up a vibrant running shoe, all pink and blue, with Corinne grinning over her shoulder. Then he'd go to his job at the lumberyard. He'd come home and spend his evenings at the dining room table, surrounded by police reports, mall blueprints, and printouts from online forums for missing persons. The official police theory was simple and, to Marco, infuriatingly lazy. 2 teenage girls with a recently divorced mother and a grieving father. They had a little money saved up. They must have run away. Case closed, unofficially. The lead detective had even patted him on the shoulder. "They'll be back when they're ready, Mr. Pierce. They always are." But Marco knew his girls. Addie was a week away from her final exams and had a scholarship interview lined up. Corey had just made the varsity soccer team. They weren't runaways. Something had happened to them at that mall. The call came just after 11 at night. The house was dark, the only light coming from Marco's laptop screen. An unknown number flashed on his phone. He usually ignored them, but something made him answer. "Mr. Pierce, this is Detective Matthias with the City Police Department." The detective's voice was low and steady. "I'm with the cold case unit. I know it's late, but I think you're going to want to hear this." Marco sat up straight, his heart starting to pound. "We got a call from a hospice nurse tonight. A patient of hers, an Albie Finch, used to be a janitor at the Northgate Mall. He's not got long, and his conscience is getting the better of him." Matthias paused. "Mr. Finch says he saw something the night your daughters disappeared. He was paid off to forget about it. He told us he found a shoe, a single, colorful running shoe, hidden behind a panel in one of the service corridors." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. A shoe. For 2 years he had been drowning in silence, and now, a shoe. It was everything. It was proof. It was the thread he could finally pull on. "Where is it?" Marco asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "He says it's still there," Matthias replied. "He never touched it after that first night. The corridor he described has been sealed off for about a year for renovations that never started." Marco was already on his feet, pulling on his boots. "I'm coming down there." "Sir, it's an active scene now." "You should stay home." "No," Marco said, the word like a stone. "I've waited 2 years. I'm not waiting another minute." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, and then a sigh. "All right, Mr. Pierce, meet us at the west entrance of the mall, but you stay behind the tape. Understood?" Marco didn't answer. He was already out the door, the ghost of his daughter's laughter for a moment feeling less like a memory and more like a promise. The Northgate Mall was a different creature at night. The bright, cheerful shopping center Marco remembered was now a cavern of shadows and echoes. The The colorful storefronts were dark, their security gates pulled down like sleeping eyelids. Detective Mathias met him at the glass doors, a tall, tired-looking man whose eyes held a flicker of empathy. "Glad you could make it," he said with a firm handshake. "Let's see what we've got." The new mall manager, a young man named Kenji, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, let them in with a jangle of keys. He led them through the silent food court, their footsteps unnaturally loud in the vast space. "The corridor Finch described is back here," Kenji said, pointing a thumb over his shoulder. "Near the old video arcade. We sealed it off last spring. Asbestos scare. The abatement team was supposed to come, but the budget got cut." He led them to a plain metal door covered in warning signs. A thick chain and a heavy-duty padlock secured it. "We'll need bolt cutters," Mathias said into his radio. While they waited, Marco's mind raced. He imagined his girls walking through this very food court, debating what to eat, laughing. Had they been scared? Did they know they were in danger? The janitor, Albie, had said he saw them being forced into a utility room by a security guard. He had described the scene in a weak, rattling voice to the detective. Two girls, one of them dropping something colorful, a man in a uniform shoving them through a door, and then that same man coming out moments later, pressing a wad of cash into Albie's hand with a single, cold warning. "You saw nothing." A maintenance worker arrived with a pair of long-handled bolt cutters. With a loud snap, the chain fell away. The door creaked open, releasing a wave of stale, dusty air. Mathias clicked on a heavy flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness. The corridor was narrow, lined with pipes and electrical conduits. The floor was concrete, littered with debris. He said it was behind a panel, near the breaker boxes, Mathias said, his voice low. They moved slowly, carefully, their flashlight beams dancing across the grimy walls. Marco felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This was it. The place where the world had stolen his daughters. He scanned the walls, his eyes tracing the thick cables. Then he saw it. A series of large, rusted electrical panels. One of them had a small gap between it and the concrete wall. "Here," Marco breathed, pointing his own small flashlight at the spot. Mathias moved over, aiming his powerful beam into the gap. And there it was. Tucked away in the shadows, covered in a fine layer of dust and cobwebs, was a single running shoe. Its bright pink and blue fabric was unmistakable. It was the shoe from the photo. A wave of dizziness washed over Marco. He leaned against the wall for support, his breath catching in his throat. It was a victory and a tragedy all at once. He had been right. They didn't run away. Something terrible had happened to them, right here in this dark, forgotten place. Mathias spoke quietly into his radio. "We found it. Notify forensics. I want this whole corridor taped off and treated as a primary crime scene." He turned to Marco, his expression grim. "The runaway theory is officially dead, Mr. Pierce. From this moment on, we're treating this as a homicide investigation." The discovery of the shoe changed everything. The police department, which had been dismissive for 2 years, was suddenly buzzing with activity. The dusty service corridor became the epicenter of a full-blown forensic investigation. While the crime scene unit collected evidence, Detective Mathias set up a makeshift office in a vacant storefront in the mall, pulling old records and employee files from the year Adelaide and Corinne disappeared. Marco refused to go home. He sat on a hard plastic chair just outside the police tape, watching the investigators in their white suits work under the harsh glare of portable lights. He felt a strange sense of detachment, as if he were watching a movie about someone else's life. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw the shoe, a vibrant splash of color in the darkness, a symbol of his daughter's stolen future. Mathias finally emerged from the corridor hours later, looking even more tired than before. He sat down next to Marco, holding 2 cups of lukewarm coffee from the mall's 24-hour donut shop. "We didn't find much else," he said, handing a cup to Marco. "A few prints, but the place is so contaminated with 2 years of dust, it'll be a miracle if we get a match. The real work starts now." He took a sip of his coffee. "We need to figure out who was working security that night. The janitor, Albie, was too sick to give us a name or a clear description, just that it was a uniform. We're pulling the security company's employment logs." For the next few days, Marco's life became a blur of waiting. He stayed at the mall, sleeping in his truck in the parking lot, fueled by coffee and a burning need for answers. He watched as Matthias and his small team interviewed former mall employees, many of whom had long since moved on and barely remembered that specific night 2 years ago. The list of security personnel who had been on duty was short. Only 4 guards had been working the evening shift. 3 of them were quickly cleared. They had solid alibis, time-stamped logins from other parts of the mall, or had been with partners. That left one name, Gavin Thorne. According to the records, Thorne had been a model employee for his first year. Quiet, punctual, never caused any trouble. But his file showed something interesting. He was quietly fired about 3 months after the girls disappeared. The official reason was vague: unprofessional conduct. "It's a dead end," one of the younger detectives said, tossing the file on the table. "Could mean anything. Maybe he was late a few times." But Matthias was more meticulous. Unprofessional conduct is what you write when you don't want a lawsuit. Let's dig deeper. He spent the next day on the phone, tracking down the mall's HR manager from that time, a woman now retired and living in another state. At first, she was hesitant to talk, but Matthias was persuasive. Finally, she told him the real story. "Gavin Thorne was a creep," she said, her voice sharp with distaste. "He was stalking one of the girls who worked at the jewelry kiosk, following her to her car, leaving notes. She filed a complaint. We gave him a warning. When he didn't stop, we let him go. We kept it quiet to protect her privacy." Matthias hung up the phone and looked at Marco, who had been listening to every word. "He had a history," Matthias said, his voice grim. "A pattern." A cold dread washed over Marco. It was no longer a question of if they had found the right man, but of what this man had done to his girls. Matthias got a warrant for Gavin Thorne's last known address, a small, isolated rental house about an hour's drive out in the countryside, surrounded by dense woods. "I want you to stay here," Matthias told Marco firmly. "This is police business now." But Marco shook his head. "That's my business out there, detective. My daughter's. I'm going." He knew Matthias couldn't officially allow it, but there was an understanding in the detective's eyes. Marco would follow, and Matthias wouldn't stop him. As the police convoy sped out of the city and into the darkening rural landscape, Marco kept his distance, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Every mile brought him closer to the truth, and he was terrified of what he would find. The police raid was swift and professional. Marco watched from a quarter mile down the gravel road as 2 squad cars and an unmarked van pulled up to the small, dilapidated house. Officers swarmed the property, their voices sharp and clear in the still evening air. There was no resistance. A man was led out in handcuffs, his head bowed. Even from a distance, Marco could see he was unremarkable, a man you wouldn't look at twice, the kind of man who could hide in plain sight. That was Gavin Thorne. Detective Matthias had told Marco to wait, but the wait was unbearable. After what felt like an eternity, Matthias's car pulled up beside his truck. The detective got out and walked over, his face etched with a sorrow so deep it seemed to age him right before Marco's eyes. He didn't have to say a word. Marco already knew. "They found them, didn't they?" Marco asked, his voice cracking. Matthias nodded slowly. "In a locked cellar beneath the house. I'm so sorry, Marco." The confession came later that night, in a sterile interrogation room at the station. Gavin Thorne, the quiet security guard, crumbled completely. He told them everything in a flat, emotionless voice. He said he had watched Adelaide and Corinne for months during their trips to the mall. He had built a fantasy around them, particularly Adelaide. He saw them as pure, untouched by the world. That night, seeing them happy and laughing in the shoe store, something inside him snapped. He knew he had to have them, to keep them for himself. He used his authority as a guard to trick them, telling them he knew a shortcut to the parking lot. He led them into the service corridor. When they realized something was wrong, they tried to run. Corinne dropped the shoe as he grabbed her, and he shoved them both into the utility closet. He saw the janitor, Albie, watching from the end of the hall, his eyes wide with fear. Gavin flashed the cash he had in his pocket, a few $100s, and threatened the old man into silence. Then he went back, tied the girls up, and forced them out a rear service exit to his car. He took them to his remote house, to the soundproof cellar he had prepared. He thought they would eventually come to love him, that they would understand he was protecting them. But they fought him. They never stopped fighting. A week after he took them, during a desperate escape attempt, Adelaide managed to strike him with a heavy pipe. In his rage and panic, he retaliated. He never meant to kill them, he claimed, but he lost control. The rest of the story was a gruesome epilogue of covering his tracks, burying his horrific secret under the floorboards of his house. Marco sat in Matthias's office as the detective relayed the story, each word a hammer blow to his heart. The pain was immense, a physical agony that left him breathless. But beneath the pain there was something else, a sliver of peace. The not knowing had been a special kind of torture, a purgatory of endless questions. Now he knew. His daughters hadn't run away, they hadn't abandoned him, they had been stolen, and they had fought. The image of Adelaide, brave and defiant to the very end, filled him with a fierce, heartbreaking pride. A few days later, they were able to bring Adelaide and Corinne home. The funeral was small, just close family and a few of the girls' friends. Marco stood by the two caskets, holding the single, colorful running shoe that had started it all. It was a strange object to hold on to, a symbol of both the happiest and the most tragic day of his life. But it was also a symbol of his promise. He had found them. He had brought them home. His work was done. As he looked out at the faces of the mourners, he saw his ex-wife, Lena, her eyes meeting his. For the first time in 2 years, the wall of anger and blame between them seemed to crumble, replaced by a shared, profound grief. The long, silent war was over. All that was left was the slow, painful work of remembering and eventually of healing. The actions of the security guard are unforgivable, but it was the janitor's silence that allowed the mystery to last for 2 long years. This brings up a difficult question. If you were in the janitor's position, scared, poor, and threatened, do you think you could have done the right thing and gone to the police sooner, or is his final confession enough to find some measure of forgiveness? We appreciate you joining us for this story. If these kinds of narratives that explore the search for truth resonate with you, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell so you don't miss what's next. Your support helps us continue to bring these important stories to light.